Hello, everybody, and welcome to our panel. We're very excited to share with you visualizing the unexpected, what you can discover in your data thanks to visualization. And we have a wonderful group of panelists today. I'm going to introduce myself. I'm Dr. Sara Diamond. I'm President Emerita of OCAD University. I'm one of the three organizers of the event. And I'm also the director of the Visual Analytics Lab at OCAD University. I'm going to now share our Indigenous land acknowledgement. Although we meet today on a virtual platform, I would like to take a moment to acknowledge the importance of the lands which we each call home. From coast to coast in Canada, we acknowledge the ancestral and unceded territories of the Inuit, Métis, and First Nations people that call this land home. For example, I'm in Toronto today, and we're in the traditional territories of the Mississauga of the Credit, the Haudenosaunee, the Anishinaabe, and the Huron-Wendat, but also in a city that is a major gathering place for Indigenous people from all over Canada, including the Inuit and the Métis. We acknowledge these people and the lands to reaffirm our commitment and responsibility in improving relationships between nations and our own understanding of local Indigenous peoples and their cultures. Please join me in acknowledging the values, perspectives, languages, and cultures which can, guide and inspire us. The role of Indigenous people as guardians and stewards of the land, and to consider how we are and can each, in our own way, move forward in a spirit of reconciliation and collaboration. So thank you. So our topic today is really to look at data visualization across a number of spectrums of methods and strategies, and the ways that it can be a really helpful way of digging deeply into our data, understanding it, analyzing it, and also sharing it with audiences. So to build our audiences and also to communicate and engage with audiences. And you're going to see some great case studies as we move forward. So it's a great pleasure for me to introduce our panelists. So we have our first panelist is Moyra Rodger from Magnify Digital, and she's the founder and CEO. And she is an award-winning producer, entrepreneur, and media industry innovator. The founder and CEO of Magnify Digital, which is a strategy agency specializing in services, training, and technology to enable creators to build large and engaged audiences around their screen, stage, and cultural content. And from that perspective, she has really, as you'll see, made data a friend in that process. We'll then hear from François Lévesque from Witify and the Polytechnique of Montréal. He is the co-founder de Witify, an entreprise de consultation en développement.
A company of software consulting and expert in data and creating of software.
And then we will hear from Sara Shepko from OCAD University. Sort of. She's actually moved on from there. But she is a graphic designer, UX, UI designer, and a web developer currently based in Toronto. She has a BFA in graphic design from the State University of New York at New Paltz and her Master's of Design in Digital Features from OCAD University. So as she was studying her master's, she was also a graduate research assistant at the Visual Analytics Lab at OCAD University. And in the summer of 2019, she interned with the Globe and Mail, Canada's largest newspaper, working with the data science team in designing wireframes and prototypes of data tools. And she's going to share some of that work today. She currently is working with a software and web company called Therefore Interactive Inc. So Moyra, we're going to fire up your presentation and have you start our wonderful dialogue today. Over to you.
Thanks so much, Sara. I'm really pleased to be here, and I want to thank you and Synapse for the invitation. So I am Moyra Rodger. I'm the CEO and founder of Magnify Digital. I'm a producer, an entrepreneur, and a strategist who uses data to drive business outcomes. So Magnify is a strategy company offering agency services, as Sara said, training and software solutions that help businesses build audiences online. We work primarily with screen media, also arts, cultural, and tourism organizations across Canada and globally. So this session is meant to examine how data visualizations can reveal insights, particularly as they relate to discoverability, or as we prefer to say, audience development. And I'm going to try to do two things. Share a little bit about our process for building audience strategies while talking about the data challenges and opportunities for visualizations at each stage. So I have about 11 minutes, I think, so let's go.
Yes, you do. Moyra, can I interrupt and just say one thing, because I made a little bit of an error, which is to let people know there is a live transcriber for the session, and you can select your language in French or English by clicking on the option at the top of the video screen. If you want to follow us, please use hashtag data ecoculture on social media. And finally, the session is recorded and transcribed and retransmitted. So if you don't want to be your face shown, you can turn off your video if you're watching. And then also just to let you know that the chat is on and we have a monitor of the chat. So please put questions in the chat during the presentations and I'll come back to them. So sorry about that, Moyra. You did not lose any time. I will give you that extra minute and back to you.
Thanks, Sarah. Thanks. Okay, so what are we talking about when we say audience development? It's the activities that drive visibility for a product, service, business, or in the case of many of our clients, TV show or film. And the steps taken to inspire audiences to take an action, such as to watch or to buy. Now, if you work outside the creative industries, think of it as your digital marketing strategy. We break the process into a five-step system we call ALERT. It's an acronym that stands for Assess, Locate, Engage, Respond, and Track. We've evolved this formula over about a decade to drive success for a wide range of businesses. The assess and locate stages may be thought of as preliminary research. The purpose is to understand opportunities and barriers for building audiences or your customer base, and also to get really clear about your target audiences. Engage is the step where we create the strategy to reach those audiences. So it combines creativity with the insights surfaced during the research stage. Respond and track are about outcomes. So responding to audiences once they engage is obviously important, and data can play a role in helping to plan and manage those two-way communications. And then the final stage is track. And this is where we rely most heavily on data to assess how your audience development efforts are working so that you can optimize the results. So let's talk a little bit about the activities involved in each stage and the data we look to leverage, starting with assess and locate. Here we're examining a range of data to uncover insights that will help us understand how best to grow audiences. We look to quantitative data, such as the number of followers a star may have of a show, the reach they have on social media, say, or influencers that might be engaged, or the number of views similar content has earned, so we can set some benchmarks and targets. And then qualitative data that provides insights into the target audiences, their gender, geolocation, interests, and so on. Now, the data sources here can include Google Analytics, digital ad campaign managers, social media platform analytics, other third-party software tools, and the data formats range from dashboards to Excel and CSV exports, and sometimes PDFs. So the question is always how to make the data meaningful. Now, this is a slide from a recent assessment done by the Magnify digital agency. It's anonymized somewhat. But it shows that if the data set is small, as it is here, it's fairly easy to pop it into a simple chart to gain insights. This is the most basic type of visualization we use, and the kind many of you likely use every day. In this case, we're looking to see if the partners involved in this project can help drive awareness for it. So you can see very easily in this chart that the Canadian Centre for XYZ has the strongest reach online and could potentially be a valuable influencer to help build audiences. As the data sets grow, this analysis becomes harder to do using simple charts and spreadsheets. Here are a few examples of exports from various sources where we're looking to learn about existing fans. It's not easy to discern trends. particularly when trying to map data from multiple sources. It takes hours and hours to do this work manually. So we see the need for more advanced visualizations, even at the very earliest stages of audience development. Now, based on the insights gleaned during the research stage, we turn our attention to the strategy, where we build the plan to engage audiences. And when we start thinking about the mechanics of the plan, we think about targets that will help define the scope and the budget. So for example, how often will we publish content? What's our ad budget? What results do we estimate that budget will drive? And also the data points we'll use to measure success, both in terms of quantitative and qualitative signals from the audience. Again, the data comes in from various sources and in various formats, often involving an export in order to bring multiple data points together. So when audiences are engaged, it's important to listen and respond. How often do audiences comment or interact with your content? What's your average response time? Again, both quantitative and qualitative data must be monitored on multiple platforms to get a picture of the conversations that are taking place and to assess how your product is landing with target groups. And track. If you can't measure it, you can't manage it, we always say. So tracking results and reporting out to stakeholders is typically essential. Certainly when you're working in the screen media industry, you've got funders to report to, a C-suite if you're dealing with a product in a private company. When you're not tracking results, we call it spray and pray, which is to be avoided. Because your data really holds the secret to success. Now again, trying to aggregate data from all these different audience touch points and visualizing it to reveal insights, as you've gathered from these first few slides, or perhaps you're doing it yourself, it's not a lot of fun. Whether your product or service is in the creative sector, or you sell tires or tourism experiences, this work can be a drain on resources. And if you engage an outside agency like ours, you're often paying quite a bit to have the data tracking done for you. This is why we created ViewerCentric. It's a web app that generates data from multiple sources and visualizes it to give it instant meaning. Now, at this time, ViewerCentric is designed for the screen media industry, but we have plans to adapt it for arts and tourism organizations. So here's how it works for screen producers. In a few steps, producers can set up a project in ViewerCentric, inputting a range of metadata such as genre, language, target audience, and so on, which later enable data to be filtered into similar groups. ViewerCentric takes in data 3 different ways. Producers can link their project's social media accounts, YouTube, Vimeo, and other accounts, allowing the data to flow effortlessly into the ViewerCentric database via API. Now, users can manually input numeric data, such as broadcast viewership or stringer viewership that is sometimes provided separately, live event attendees, as well as qualitative data, awards, festival invitations, audience feedback, and so on. And the third way is we can ingest data directly into the database. So we're working with a few broadcasters now who are providing an export of viewership data, and we're inputting it right into the database, which of course minimizes the risk of error and saves a lot of time. So the charts that are then visualized as a result of the data start simple, as you can see here, and then they can be filtered to add additional dimension and meaning. Benchmarking is a powerful feature within the ViewerCentric visualization. You see it here represented by that pink bar. Sometimes when you look at audience data, sometimes when you look at any data, it's difficult to know whether the results are good, whether your particular success metric, whether you're performing well against other similar types of products or shows, whatever the case may be. So ViewerCentric presents a benchmark average based on data from other shows, always anonymized, but it gives you an idea of similar shows. And then the platform has filters for refining the benchmarks too, because obviously a primetime series on broadcast may have different success markers than a one-off niche documentary. So again, we can filter on criteria such as language, genre, time in market, all the metadata that we put in to begin with. This is another view that shows the value even a simple bar chart can deliver. So this is the viewership of episodes for each of 2 seasons. Season 1's on the left, season 2's on the right. That sharp slope on the right is worrying and suggests viewership is steadily declining in season 2. So this is a cue that maybe your marketing efforts need to focus on reminding viewers, maybe you need a retargeting campaign to return to watch the later episodes. Maybe you need to find audiences that are perhaps a better fit and will stay with the show. Or perhaps the stories just aren't as compelling as the series goes on, which would be of interest to the creative team. On the enterprise side of ViewerCentric, in this case, funders of screen projects can see data about individual shows, or they can see their entire portfolio. This is the audience index score that we created. And here, each bubble represents the relative viewership of individual projects plotted over the time they've been in market. So we used to produce these charts manually from nasty spreadsheets, and they literally took days to create. Now they're available on demand. So the audience index bubble chart can be filtered too, so you can just see a subset of projects, maybe say only French language web series. Those could be examined to see which shows are over or underperforming, which would then prompt further investigation. So what we're trying to figure out here is what factors commonly contribute to this type of show achieving high viewership. I don't know if I mentioned the size of the bubble is the size of the funder's contribution. And you can see how this could apply to other industries too. Rather than screen media projects, these bubbles could represent performances or exhibits. Or in tourism, they could represent individual operators. So that's sort of a quick summary, a progression from a basic table to interactive charts with advanced filtering that make it possible to slice and dice the data with the click of a button. And so now that we've built this powerful data engine within ViewerCentric and we're growing the user base, in fact, we just announced today a really exciting collaboration with the Shaw Rocket Fund, TELUS Fund, and Bell Fund. We're focused on advancing our visualizations and filtering systems and using machine learning to surface patterns and insights that can inform the audience development of future projects. And we're excited to continue our work with Dr. Diamond to that end.
Great.
Thank you very much.
Thanks. Thank you so much, Moyra. I'm going to circle back to you at some point and have you talk a little bit about how you think about and understand the audiences for the product and their level of kind of skill and capacity with analytics. So keep that in your mind, but we're going to keep moving on. And it's a great pleasure now to ask François Lévesque to present his work.
Bonjour à tous. It's going to be the first presentation.
Hello, everyone.
Today, for this panel. Aujourd'hui, je vais vous présenter MuseLink.
So today I will present MuseLink, which is a very interesting project linked to the present panel. It was done in collaboration with the National Library and Archives of Quebec. For those who aren't from Quebec, it is the largest library and archives in the province. I am a software engineer by formation. I have a master's in data visualization and co-founder of Witify. So quickly, I will describe the project, what it was with the National Library and Archives. As you know, the large libraries have a lot of data, and one of the challenges was they had a game with artists and songs with relations between them, and the idea was to show the information or the hidden insights behind these relations. So quickly, we did a little exploration, as you can see here, but we realized that that was not sufficient. We needed a bit of a more custom solution to be able to answer more complex questions and understand the data better. So
entre 18 et
audience were people between 18 or 60 who loved culture. So quite wide scope, but the idea was to have people find information by people who weren't data analysis professionals. So what was the game? So there are artists and there are songs. One song is linked to one or more artists. Now this relationship is characterized by a role. For example, in this case, you see that the artist on the top left was the singer of the song at the center. And the following artist is also...
You need to share your screen.
Oh. Thank you. Is it working now?
Yes, beautifully. Thank you.
All right.
Continue.
Donc voici le jeu de données. Sorry.
So this is the data set. We have the artists on the left and the songs on the right. One song is linked to one or more artists, as I said, and there's a relationship characterized by a role. For example, here the artist is the singer, this other is a singer, this one is the writer, and this one is the composer. Now, there might be more than one role for one relationship, but the artist on the top left, for example, is both the singer and writer for the song in the middle. Once you add another song, we can see that there is then a relationship of collaboration. Artist A and artist B collaborated together on song 2. Artist A is the singer and artist B was the composer and writer. And then when we add more and more songs and more artists, it becomes very difficult to follow and we don't understand what is happening. So we have to find a way to represent the complexity of this data in a way that is understandable. So how did we do it? With 24,000 songs, 19,000 artists, it was a huge task. We had to find a way of simplifying it to make it readable and understandable. But the data is even more complex. There are trees within the graphs. I'll explain. If we take the previous example, the song is in an adaptation tree. An adaptation happens when, for example, we translate a song or when we take the melody of a song and make it into a new song. So song B here is an adaptation of song A, and song C and D are adaptations of song B. And this allows to see and put into a relation two artists who inspire each other. So there's a tree between two songs. There's an adaptation. If you add the artists around it, we notice that artist A inspired artist B. Artist B wrote, composed, and sang the song on the right, but it is an adaptation of the song on the left. So there's a relationship of inspiration between the two. So the idea is to show the collaborations and inspirations that exist between artists and also to show the evolution through time, but it has to be presented in a way that can be understood by everyone. So the objective is readability, explorability, and discoverability, and to make it accessible to all. So the solution was the following. We decided to focus on a single artist in order to reduce the clutter and optimize the reading. We also split the information in different views in order to simplify and optimize each view, and then we can link the different views with the different interactions. So this is an example with Jodassin, who is a French singer, very well-known singer. So here we have the main information on the timeline and the list of artists at the bottom left, and then viewed by song at the bottom right. The top view isn't as important. We don't need to get into it today. The timeline, the connected timeline, is the most important. We find all the songs linked to Jodassin, and each song is represented by a circle. The songs are put on the X line according to their date of creation, and they're also linked with the adaptation links that are also on the timeline. Now, the first timeline, the main timeline, is that of production. It's all the songs that Jodassin produced. On the left, we have songs in which he was either author, singer, so he was the first one to sing it, or the composer. On the right, we see songs where he was the second, third, or fourth person to sing the song. And on the top, we have the inspirations. These are songs that inspired Joe Dassin. So, for example, Ce n'est pas une fille was a song produced in 1965 by Joe Dassin, but it is a French adaptation of the song written in 1961 called Wanted Man.
Joe Dassin a également chanté St. James Infirmary, mais c'est pas lui qui l'a.
Joe Dassin also wrote St. James Infirmary, but originally the song was written in 1928. The timeline at the bottom represents the influences, so the songs that were influenced by Joe Dassin. On the left, adaptations, and on the right, the covers.
Un exemple ici, I Fish Baby.
I Fish Baby, an example of a song written in 1967, is an adaptation of Bébé Requin, a French song that was written the same year by Joe Dassin. Another example, Plus je te vois, plus je te veux, is a cover of a song originally sung in 1968 by Joe Dassin. But it's also an adaptation of Everlasting Love, written a year before. Then we see, for each timeline, a column with all the artists. On the left, you have the people who inspired Joe Dassin. Tony Joe White is the person that influenced him the most. At the center, you see the collaborators. So those people who collaborated with Joe Dassin. Claude Lemel, 62 involvement. And we see with this role that he was mainly an author, so he wrote the songs for Joe Dassin. And on the right, the influenced, so the people that were influenced by Joe Dassin. Clicking on a song, you can see more details on a song, and I won't get into the details, but there are complementary information that are also shared. We carried out a study on the product to assess its efficiency, and we found out that 95% discovered new information, which is very high. And the people were satisfied with the information that they found, and they were satisfied and also entertained. So globally, we had a very large and complex data set. We decided to focus on a single artist to assess. We divided the visualization in separated views.
Donc, quelles sont les leçons?
So what are the takeaways? In the visualization, analysis, and design book, there are 3 main steps that have to be respected. The what first, the data, why, tasks, and target audience, the person that we're targeting, and the how, that is the visualization models. So the way to get there. We may think that they are sequential, but rather it's an iterative way to unfold. And this is an excellent example. The data were very complex. I summarized them and they look simple, but it took a lot of time before we understood what was hidden behind those data. So we had to analyze the data, ask questions with the audience, build some first prototypes, and then go back again several times. Usually, engineers are very good at what and how, and they take care of that easily. But the why is a little bit more challenging. We sometimes forget whom we're targeting. So we're so focused on the technical that we forget wondering what we want to do with the tool, or we believe that it's going to be easy to get there. So that takes me to the second point, the importance of having a user-centered design. So at each stage of the process, we validate our ideas with the target audience. This is very important to make sure that we have good outcomes. Whether it's a draft, a first draft, or prototype, we always have to validate it with the target audience, not only for visualization data, but in many other fields. It could be very helpful with many other fields of application. So this is to summarize Muslink, the project that I shared with you. You also have online demo on Muslink, Witify.io. So if you have any questions, also at the end of the panel, you can certainly ask them.
Yeah, François, really such an impressive and deep project. And I will come back to you and have you talk a little bit about how you did imagine the audience and the kind of audience that has been using it. Sort of similar question to Moyra, but maybe with you are actually audience facing, and Moyra's tool is to analyze audiences. And now we're going to move to something quite different, which is Sana and her presentation about her work with the Globe and Mail. Over to you, Sana.
Thank you, Sarah. Just a second, I'm sharing my screen.
That works.
Great. So hello, everybody. Thank you so much for being here, and I really appreciate all the organization that goes into an event like this. I know it's not easy, especially during these pandemic times, so big shout out to the organizers. So today, I'm going to be speaking a little bit about a project that I worked on as a graduate student at OCAD University, as Sarah mentioned. I was working at the Visual Analytics Lab, and we were involved with the Globe and Mail in order to produce a dashboard visualization tool that they could use internally. And the reason that they were looking for a dashboard was because they produce a massive amount of data on a routine basis about user behavior and interests. So they were seeking an interactive visualization tool that reveals and explores the related interests and audience patterns of their readers. So while I will use the term reader, think of this tool as useful in the context of audience analysis beyond the Globe and Mail, as long as you have data that shows what they're consuming. So for this purpose, TasteGraph, which is the term we use to refer to this project, was created by the Visual Analytics Lab. And the objective of TasteGraph is to enable interactive narrative visualizations that provide data-driven insights regarding the interests of the Globe's readers, as well as how those interests correspond to the advertisements that those readers tend to interact with the most. So while we were working on this project, our lab really was very involved with the Globe's team as well. So people from the marketing and advertising teams. First to identify the objective of the tool, and then to get feedback on our iterative prototypes. Our end users of this tool were employees from the Globe and Mail's advertising team who would be using TasteGraph in order to identify the most effective and personalized placement of targeted advertisements. So a key thing to note here is that TasteGraph is giving insights into how different interests are correlated. And the way that we were measuring this is through something called a taste score. So what you see on the screen right now is a breakdown of this basic taxonomy. So a taste score is a weight measure that quantifies a reader's interest level in a given topic. Topics are categorized across taste groups. So as part of this project, we were looking at ads tracking analytics, as well as the taxonomy of advertising categories to help correlate the most targeted advertisements to the tastes of any given subscriber to the Globe and Mail website. So our team, in tandem with the Globe's data science team, worked to create TasteGraph by combining technologies such as React, Angular, and Python REST APIs. And this is sort of a breakdown of what I was mentioning with the taste score and that getting connected to the taste taxonomy, as well as the ads and their categorization of the ads that they had. So there's multiple data sets that needed some sort of relationship and mapping. So in terms of the interface, so this is the part that I was really involved with as a designer, as someone who was figuring out data visualization techniques in order to reveal insights from such large data sets that are very disparate. So the user interface was sort of a really key thing for us to uncover, because our end users, the Globe team, were actually really involved in the process. And so going back to this concept of user-centered design, this was a fantastic opportunity for us to have very routine touch bases with them and to uncover a lot of information. So as we were designing this, we were routinely checking in with the Globe's team to understand how they would actually be using this, if this is intuitive, if this is actually serving their needs. So I'm going to walk through the process that we went through creating a report in order to use TasteGraph to visualize an advertisement's performance on the Globe and Mail's website. So it was important that the process of creating a selection, so something that we're going to be visualizing in the report, it was important that that followed the logic of the advertisement category structure, which adhered to the advertising pipeline that the Globe and Mail team was accustomed to. And this was approached this way in order to help minimize the learning curve when it came to training the staff to use this tool in the future. So a user would select the category of the advertisement they're interested in investigating, and then they'd have the capability to go as granular as selecting the exact line item of that specific advertisement. So for example, if you wanted to look at all of your advertisements within the category of business, subcategory of banks, and you wanted to look at TD Bank as an advertiser. So there were multiple levels of categorizations that you could go through in order to create the visualization that you wanted. So I also want to note that TasteGraph is in essence a comparative tool. So you'll see here Easy Web App is the first selection, and then there's a selection 2. So the selection process facilitates a comparison between the performance of 2 advertisements once the visualization has been run. And in the case that no other selections have been identified, it'll automatically be compared to the universe, which we used as a term to describe the performance of all advertisements on the Globe's websites, which serves as a baseline for comparison. So once a user identifies the advertisements they're interested in comparing and hits the run button, they're brought to the visualization, which is a bubble plot that charts the engagement with the advertisements according to taste groups and taste score. So Edward Tufte explains that successful data visualization requires a sense of narrative, or showing data in a structure of representations in such a way that they create a compelling argument. So some sort of narrative needs to be in place. As we developed the design of this, we found that it was important to highlight the direct comparison of ad performance, and this helped us to build on the narrative of comparison. So our visualization displays the performance of an advertisement according to taste groups and taste score. The ad performances are broken down across the taste taxonomy, showing how the ads performed across various interest groups. So if you look at the x-axis on the bottom, this is the ad groups, and then the actual performance of the advertisement in question is shown by the size of the bubble. The ads selected by the user are assigned a unique color and pattern. So as I mentioned, x-axis represents taste groups, y-axis represents the taste score. The size of the bubble, again, shows the engagement by the taste group with the selected advertisement. We also signified whether selection 1 or selection 2 performed better in a taste group by assigning a different stroke and color to the line connecting the bubbles. Significant to note is that TasteGraph not only confirmed the relationships in tastes of readers that one might expect. For example, people who read a lot of articles about cars would also be interested in advertisements for BMWs, pretty standard, but also revealed certain correlations that were unexpected and new for us. So for example, and this is just an example, but people interested in astrology might also have a habit of clicking on advertisements for Rolex watches. So the insights we uncovered through this project were really interesting because we were sort of uncovering things that went against biases. So the algorithms used in this project were designed to aggregate related taste groups. Taste groups with stronger affinity to the selection would be in closer proximity to the center. And it would show also in the strength of the color. So in this example, you'll see we've selected one of the bubbles, and this has opened up a side panel, which shows a new visualization. So in this example, the user has selected the taste group astrology, which is most closely related to television, books, and literature. In this way, it's also possible to drill down into the main visualization to reveal additional ways to represent the data. So if the user were to click on any bubble in the visualization, it opens up this right panel, which reveals the related taste groups to that selected bubble. So another thing to note, we weren't just playing around with bubble charts, we also incorporated a bar chart that visualizes the same data that's being shown in the visualization in a different form. So comparing the two advertisements by score and engagement. And the reason why we wanted to have different methods of visualization was because showing the same data in a different form follows best practices in data visualization, because it acknowledges differences in cognitive capacities. So one person might really be able to understand bar charts really well, while another person might relate better to bubble charts. So having this variety in display of information was useful for people who would have to use this in order to uncover insights. So although this project had a main goal of targeting advertisements based on data on readers' interests, it's also possible to envision how this kind of analytics might be valuable in different scenarios. As I mentioned before, we were able to uncover new insights that were surprising and unexpected. And I just want to note that it's important for us to look at data and visualization as a tool that we can use to discover new things in a way that is data-driven, statistics-driven, and not driven by bias, because that is the way to learn and to improve. So data visualization is an incredibly important tool. So I'm glad to have everyone here, and thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Sana. Thank you very much. Great. So I'm going to start out with questions, but also remind our audience to put them in the chat, and Alexis will bring them forward. And I will start in order of the presentations. And Moyra, can you talk? I mean, I really want to talk a little bit about learnability with all of these, and your users, and how you thought about them. And Moyra, you've got some very basic graphs, but you also have analysts who have to really dig into that data and get more out. So take us through how you think about the level of sophistication of your users and their learning curve, and how you facilitate that.
Yeah, it's a great question, and one that we've spent a lot of time thinking of, because we go from users that are really new to data to those that are more of a power user. So, I was a television producer for 15 years, and my entire career in producing, I never really thought that much about the audience, because my buyer was the broadcaster or whomever was licensing. So when I started this into this space about 12 years ago, I had the sharpest learning curve of anyone, and so I have a lot of empathy for producers that don't necessarily, for whom data isn't intuitive. They deal with different sorts of data with budgets and whatnot, but this kind of data is different. So we really need to try to serve our users who are at that level, that are coming at it very much as storytellers, and who also don't want to be shackled by data, which we all understand, all the way up to our funder users who are used to getting reports and used to dealing with data. So it's quite a range. And the way we're trying to bridge it is by giving that progressive or ability to progress through more sophisticated charts and filtering. So you can look at ViewerCentric and say, oh, my viewership is, that example that I used, my viewership is dropping off. That's bad. I need to go and figure out my marketing. Or you can drill in, as I said, to some of the, to create light groups to play with your benchmarks, to see where you're sitting, and as we move forward, to drill into a better audience segmentation, and then ultimately surface the insights that'll help with future projects.
So interaction design is a really critical part of how you imagine the user, that they're not just static graphics, but they're ones that people can interact with.
And in this case, it's sort of like, I love what Sana just showed, but it's about layering data. That's how you find the insights. And so that's not necessarily intuitive either. So our challenge is to come up with a platform where it is obvious what you need to match. So that you can really get to, just that example that if you look at your total viewership for a season and season 2 is up over season 1, you think terrific. But you need to know to drill in a little bit deeper and see, all that effort, we're actually not doing that well in season 2. Our trend is the wrong way. And then how much deeper, then what platforms are we trending down on? And, so you walk through the data, and our job is to guide people to make that journey through the maze as painless as possible and as meaningful, to surface data that's as meaningful as possible.
Thank you. So, François, beautiful work, and really, so focused on using data for audience experience. So your users are users of the library, and can you take us through how, and that was one of the questions that you had, that you said engineers aren't that great at dealing with. Well, why are we doing this and for whom? So take us through your journey of how you imagined your users, how people actually are using it, because you've had great reviews, and what their learning curve is and how you've managed that.
Mm-hmm. Excellent question.
And le français, c'est bien.
Okay. Donc, c'est une super bonne question.
So it's an excellent question. In our case, it was a colossal challenge, because our audience was really broad. The smaller, the more specific it is, the easier it is. But for us, it was so broad that initially it was very complex to see what task we wanted to focus on. So we organized panels with many people to do brainstorming, and then trying to focus on some tasks and think, well, these are the relations that we could extrapolate this information. And we asked them, what would you like to see through those data? And so after all those panels, we were able to extrapolate some questions. Then we had to choose. We had to pick some that were maybe the most relevant for our project. And then slowly, with little prototypes, we were able to develop a tool that was able to respond to those questions. Well, not everybody would be happy with our approach, because again, our audience was very broad, so we had to make some choices. But the questions that we chose, well, the audience that was assessed for those specific questions was very satisfied with it, and they appreciated finding out new pieces of information. Does it answer to your question?
Yeah, it doesn't. I mean, you used, you use a strategy where you, like a bubble graph, and you identify, you cluster, and then people, can click on that particular artist and see the relationship. How did you actually think through the visual design? I very much vote for, as we did with the Globe and Mail work, that you had different ways of representing. You had the graphs that are pretty direct, where you can do the comparisons, but you have this sort of elegant but kind of complex relationship between clustering and time, like a time graph. So just take us through a little bit about through the visual design as you were thinking it through and you were thinking about its legibility.
Mm-hmm. Excellent. Je peux partager mon écran peut-être parce que j'ai juste.
Well, I may share my screen because I have old prototypes that might explain our evolution. Since the beginning, the idea was to create a design that would allow us to show each song specifically. So the more we aggregate data, the more data becomes simple to read. But we tend to lose some information. So we wanted to cap the complexity, but make it also usable. Because if you digest it too much, you lose very important information, distribution in time, and pieces of information about how data were made as years went by, or we would lose other information that were relevant. So that was the first constraint that we had. We had to represent the song as it was. And in the first design, as you may see here, we're really focused on the song itself. So
you haven't shared your screen yet, so share your screen.
Oh, mon Dieu.
Your voice description is very
it's not easy. Okay.
There you go.
Now,
okay, beautiful. Yeah.
Donc, comme on peut le voir ici,
so as you can see it here, each song is represented in a unique way. So this is what we wanted to do here. That's another representation, visualization, that was done earlier, but it's very close to the final representation. So we already had that in mind, to represent the song and keep the distribution in time. Because if we don't show the distribution in time and we only do a diagram, then we cannot answer to questions like during what year the artist Nana Mouskouri produced most of her songs. And there we can figure out that it's during the 70s that she was very popular. She did a lot of songs. And the links, the adaptations were later in the 80s or 90s. So when we represent the song, we have much more information. However, we lose a little bit in readability. But the whole idea is to find a method of visualization that allows you to, even though you have a lot of information, allows you to read it, and you're able to recognize, the eye is able to recognize the patterns easily. And that's what visualization helped us to do. So this is to answer maybe a little bit better to your question.
Sara, ask your question of François.
Yeah, I was just wondering, in that visualization you showed with the inspiration and then influence on the bottom, what is the difference between those two? Is inspiration going into that middle row and then the middle row goes into the influence?
I'm going to share my screen again just to make sure I understand what you say.
Yeah.
Okay, is it working? Good. So yes. You're talking about that visualization, right?
This visualization is a version of, I think it's like 54.
The final version, you mean? Okay.
Yeah.
This one. Okay.
Yes. So the differences between inspiration and influence.
Okay, great question. Pour répéter la question en français, donc.
Just to repeat the question, what is the difference between the inspiration at the top and the influences at the bottom? So the main difference is the direction of the influence. In that case, we look at one artist, Joe Dassin, French-speaking artist. All his songs are on the central timeline. However, all the songs that inspired Joe Dassin, so other people upstream, can be found at the top. So all the songs you see at the top inspired songs of Joe Dassin. So he adapted blue songs, basically. But the influences are the other way around. Those are songs that were influenced by Joe Dassin. So the song here is an adaptation of a song done by Joe Dassin. So bottom of line, the flow of the little transparent lines will go from left to right, because it's impossible to adapt a song that isn't born yet. So inspiration and influences go the other way, well, the opposite to one another in terms of trend.
Thank you. Sana, a question for you. It's interesting because this tool was built for the Globe and Mail for their marketing and advertising department, and then what happened is it was taken in-house, and they're actually using it more for their analytics team to be able to understand their preference engine and how to direct recommendations. So it's a good example of flexibility, but also, thinking about how to design something that, even though it's for one group, it could actually move over to another user group. And I just wondered if you could talk a little bit about how we dealt with, we're working with a brand aesthetic, and we also were trying to deal with issues of visual perception and color. And can you talk a little bit about strategies with the use of shade and pattern and what those kinds of affordances can give users in terms of visualization?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, so it was actually a very interesting process because, as I mentioned, we were doing so many frequent meetings with them. And it actually turned out that one of our original designs was just red and black to indicate the differences in the bubbles. But they actually had some employees that were colorblind. So the first thing they said was, we don't know what's going on in this visualization. We can't tell the difference. So that was a really key moment for us because we actually had some real user feedback that we actually needed to incorporate different visual indicators to separate out those differences. So we ended up using some patterns in order to indicate that. And it was a really good learning experience, I think, for us. Real life impact. So, yeah.
Great. Thank you very much. So this panel was curated to show levels of complexity in visualization and visual design, and to encourage those of you in the audience who don't use visualization to understand that you can do very simple, very effective things with large quantities of data. But also, as you're dealing with more sophisticated, complex interrelationships, you can up the ante as you move forward. Some of that can require the need to put in time for learnability. So if you're really building something for analysts, you give them time to learn. You teach them how to use those tools. You give them that space. And people can learn on both a cognitive and also an interaction design level to work with more and more complex data visualizations. But we've also seen, from work that François showed, that there's a pretty sophisticated user out there who responds well to tools. And so think about visualization, not just about analyzing your data for building your audience needs, but for your audiences. So they can actually engage with your content, engage with your experiences, and give their responses to you through using visualization tools. So thank you very much to the panelists. I'm just going to give you a little bit of a heads up on what's next. Excuse me, we have our last session of our day's learnings. And Cathy Desbiens-Demure is an artist who's going to be presented by Mutech. And there's also you can book a consultation with a solutions bar and network with participants. So thank you very much, Moyra, François, and Sana, for really delightful presentations and sharing your wisdom. And have a great rest of the day, and come join us and see the artist's work. Bye, everybody. See you tomorrow, and see you at 2 o'clock in the next panel. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you.